If you remember back to our introduction when we started talking about the different classes of nutrients, one of those classes was water. And we want to spend a few minutes talking about the importance of water in nutrition and then in overall health for the body. When you think about the percentage of body weight that's made up by water, we say that the standard is around 60%. For some folks it can be even higher, up to 75%. That would be someone who is incredibly athletic generally with a lot of muscle. Muscle tends to be better hydrated than fat tissue, so that really accounts for that difference. There are several functions of water that I want to point to specifically. And when we look at the role it plays in cellular health, it moves nutrients to cells and then also removes different kinds of waste products and even products of metabolism to other parts of the body. It's also a universal solvent and a universal cleansing agent. Water is also incompressible. And what that means is that we can't make it smaller. If you think about something like a water balloon, if you were to try to squish that water balloon and stick it in your back pocket, you wouldn't be able to. And this has real advantages when we talk about its protective quality, especially for joints like knees and elbows and things like this. It also plays a role in thermoregulation. So it allows us to stay cool. In the summer we sweat and that evaporates and it cools the body. There are some other things that we want to take into consideration around nutrition, and one of them is water balance. What we're really talking about here is inputs to the system should equal outputs so that you don't have extra body fluid and you're also not dehydrated. Those are two particular concerns that we have. When we look at dehydration, it's very, very simply water loss. And when we see this happening in an individual, there's generally a cascade of different symptoms or consequences. When you actually start to feel thirst, it's a signal that you're somewhat dehydrated at that point. You can look this up and you'll see that there's a little bit of disagreement about the percentage of dehydration when you actually feel thirst. Some people say around 5% dehydrated at that point. So one of the recommendations we have around staying hydrated is just to drink generally, not to wait until you're thirsty. We also see weakness. And this can come in with athletes in particular. So if you're interested in increasing your athletic performance, one of the quickest ways to do it is to make sure that you're well hydrated. So a lot of times people don't need all those supplements and all those things they spend money on. They can actually just have a little bit more water. We also see exhaustion and delirium and confusion, and it can finally lead to death in some cases when people are extremely dehydrated. We also have water intoxication, and this is really going the other direction, where we have a lot of extra fluid on board. Sometimes you'll hear people talking about radio contests or with fraternities or sororities or something like this, and they'll have a water drinking contest. And what happens is that that person takes on a lot of extra fluids and it starts to dilute those electrolytes. And you can see a lot of normal balance with cells start to be corrupted in this kind of a situation. So it can be very dangerous. And the symptoms here are somewhat similar to the symptoms we see with dehydration. Headaches and confusion. You can also see where people feel really weak. They have concentration issues, and this can also lead to death, just like dehydration. I used the word electrolyte a minute ago, and so I want to tell you a little bit more about that. Electrolytes are basically just dissolved minerals in the serum of the body. We think about especially sodium and potassium, also magnesium and calcium and some other ones. These are electrically charged, they're ions. And they have a particular function to play in maintaining different kinds of activities at the cellular level. They also are involved in acid-base balance, and a whole bunch of other smaller regulatory roles. There's no diet that lacks sodium, so we don't have to worry about that in most cases. Where we might have some concern about electrolyte balance is someone that is maybe working out at a high temperature, but maybe in the summer they're sweating a lot and they're losing electrolytes through the sweat. And for that person it might be important to have an electrolyte replacement. But you can also achieve that with a handful of pretzels or a beverage or something like that. Actually getting off of your bicycle or off the machine and eating a banana would also be helpful. So I really want to get people away from using some of those electrolyte replacement formulas unless they're prescribed by a physician. And sometimes a physician will recommend them, especially in a case of long-term illness or diarrhea or a lot of vomiting where the person can't keep the food down. But for other folks, just eating food is really the way to go. There are recommendations about how much fluid you should have a day. And again, these vary. You can look at a lot of different sources and they're going to give you somewhat conflicting information. The DRI, the dietary reference intake, is set to achieve about 80% of the day's need for water. And for men, this is about 13 cups on average. For women, about 9 cups. And those are 8-ounce cups. So you can do the math there. Another method that I really prefer is 1 milliliter of water for every calorie that you're consuming. So if someone's on a 2,000 calorie diet, this is going to translate to about 2 liters of water per day. This is a fairly good model for most people. Now, there are reasons why people might need additional water, and so we want to take a look at those as well, because there are some people that those recommendations aren't going to really suit their requirement. So people that are consuming alcohol, or if they're in cold weather, and you may say, well, cold weather, how does that fit into this picture? But in the cold weather, the air tends to be much drier, and we're also staying inside with a lot of heat. So it kind of dries us out a little bit more. If you have a lot of fiber in your diet, you'd also want to have additional water there. So when I recommend to people that they start including more fiber-rich foods, I also say you need to increase the amount of fluid. For people that don't bring on more fluid, it can actually cause some constipation and quite a bit of discomfort. We also see particular diseases causing some issues here. So if people have diabetes or kidney issues, that might increase their needs. Being in an air-conditioned environment or a forced air environment, so again in the winter we see that, but also if you think about maybe you're taking a long drive in the summer and you have the air conditioning on, or you're in an airplane, you're going to feel really dry from that. Heated environments, high altitude, hot weather, especially when there's a lot of humidity, because people tend to sweat a lot more. When people are taking on a lot more sodium or a lot more sugar or protein, those needs for fluid can be increased. If someone is in a ketotic state, and we talked a little bit about this when we talked about carbohydrates, they're also going to need more fluids. People on medications, especially if it's a diuretic medication, which is going to cause the loss of body fluids, you need to increase fluid intake. And generally the requirement is water. Pregnancy and lactation also increase needs. And as I mentioned before, illnesses such as diarrhea or vomiting would increase fluid needs. Anyone that's had surgery or has had a bad burn or something like this, or even if you've given blood recently, very often they'll say, hey, drink a couple extra glasses of fluid, and that's a good recommendation. People that are very young and very old also, especially if they're in any of those environmental situations that we talked about, high temperature or forced air or things like this. One quick note about older folks, so if you maybe have a loved one in a long-term nursing facility and you go to visit them, you'll notice it tends to be warmer there. So that's going to increase fluid needs. Also, as people age, that thirst mechanism kind of is dampened, so they may not feel thirsty. So they're often encouraged to just drink whenever they, see the cup of water, whenever it's in their environment. One of the reasons older folks tend to not drink as much, besides those biochemical changes with a thirst mechanism, is that if they're a little unsteady on their feet, they're afraid they're going to fall, especially in the bathroom, or if they're incontinent, they're a little bit worried about that. So we want to set up mechanisms to encourage them to drink and also to be safe in those environments. That's really about all I wanted to say about fluid. I'd like you to know the importance of it, particular situations that would increase your fluid needs, and then general recommendations around consumption.